In 73 BCE, a single gladiator transformed cooking utensils into weapons that would shake Rome to its foundations, leading 100,000 rebels in history's most terrifying slave uprising, and nearly brought down an empire that ruled the known world. 6,000 crucified bodies lined 120 miles of Rome's most important highway. But here's what the Roman historians tried to hide. This wasn't just a slave revolt. This was the moment one man threatened to collapse the entire Roman economy, 30% of its population ready to rise against their masters. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a slave became more feared than Hannibal himself. You'll discover 3 revelations that change everything. First, the secret military background that made Spartacus unstoppable. Second, why Rome's greatest weakness wasn't its armies, but its kitchens. And third, the betrayal that doomed 100,000 to the most horrific mass execution in history. How did gladiators turn vine ropes into military victory? What made Crassus crucify one of his own soldiers every hour? Why did Spartacus force Romans to fight each other as gladiators? Think about this for a second. In the heart of the empire that conquered the Mediterranean, that built roads spanning continents, that created laws still used today, a handful of enslaved fighters with kitchen knives nearly brought it all crashing down. The age of Roman invincibility died with kitchen knives, but the guards didn't check the kitchen that night in Capua. They had no idea that in the gladiator barracks, men who'd been forced to kill for entertainment were sharpening more than just cooking tools. They were sharpening their hunger for freedom. To understand how one man nearly destroyed Rome, we must first enter the depths of hell itself, the gladiator schools where death was theatre and human life was measured in ticket sales. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of history's most decisive battles, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war content. Ring the bell to join our legion of history warriors. Now, let me take you back to the blood-soaked sands of Capua. Rome, 73 BCE. You have to understand the scale here. Out of every 3 people walking Roman streets, 1 was property. Not a citizen, not even considered fully human property. Between 30 to 40% of Italy's population lived in chains, powering the engine of the greatest empire the world had ever seen. The gladiatorial games weren't just entertainment. They were political control, psychological warfare against the enslaved masses. Watch your fellow slaves die for sport. Understand your place. Accept your fate. Then something happened that defied all military logic. Enter Lentulus Batiatus. History remembers him as the Merchant of Death. His gladiator school in Capua wasn't just any training ground. This was Rome's factory of killers, where human beings were transformed into living weapons. Each gladiator represented an investment worth 20 years of a common worker's wages. These weren't just slaves, they were premium merchandise. The compound squatted like a fortress prison hybrid, 20-foot walls, armed guards at every corner, iron bars on windows, chains welded to beds. But Batiatus had made one miscalculation. He'd purchased a Thracian prisoner of war, a man the sellers described only as difficult to break. Spartacus arrived in chains but walked with the bearing of a soldier. This is where Spartacus proved he wasn't just a gladiator. His fighting style puzzled the trainers. He moved like someone who'd commanded men, who understood battlefield tactics, not just arena theatrics. The daily routine was designed to break spirits while building bodies. 4 a.m. wake-up calls announced by clanging iron. 10 hours of relentless training, wooden swords crashing, sand grinding under feet, the stench of straw and sweat in underground cells. Nightfall brought chains, locking gladiators to their beds like animals. But in darkness, whispered conversations spread like wildfire. The Thracians spoke of mountains where free men lived, of battles where warriors chose their cause. Other gladiators listened. Crassus, an undefeated Gaul whose strength was legend. Oenomas, a doctore who trained others to kill, but dreamed of different lessons. The number is almost impossible to comprehend. 200 men imprisoned, knowing that despite 90% survival rates in the arena, their lives meant nothing beyond the next show. They were worth fortunes, but valued as nothing, living weapons locked away between performances. Then came the day Rome would never forget. A gladiator selling information about an escape plan to curry favor with Batiatus. The conspiracy discovered. Executions ordered for morning. Time had run out. That night, as guards made their rounds, they didn't notice the missing kitchen slaves, didn't count the cooking knives, didn't realize that in the depths of their human warehouse, revolution was stirring. But what transformed a valuable asset into Rome's greatest nightmare? The gladiator, who made Rome tremble, started his revolution with the humblest of weapons. 70 men armed with kitchen knives and meat cleavers faced guards carrying military-grade equipment. What followed would shatter Roman confidence forever. Spartacus's Thracian combat techniques proved devastating in close quarters. While arena fighting favored spectacle, his style emphasized efficiency strikes to disable, movements to confuse, tactics to overwhelm. Crassus, the undefeated Gaul, fought beside him, his massive frame crashing through Roman formations like a battering ram. Oenomaus, the doctor, directed the assault with trainer's precision, turning chaos into coordinated attack. The compound erupted. Guards expecting cowering slaves met organized resistance. Kitchen implements found throats and gaps in armor. Within minutes, the impossible happened. Gladiators poured through the gates of Capua's most secure facility. This is where the story takes its darkest turn. They could have scattered, disappeared into Italy's vastness. Instead, Spartacus led them to Mount Vesuvius. The volcano's slopes offered perfect defensive positions, steep approaches, hidden caves, abundant fresh water. More importantly, it sent a message: we're not running, we're building. Word spread faster than Rome could respond. In 3 days, 3,000 followers had climbed the mountain, not just fighting men, families, elderly, children, everyone who heard the impossible news. Gladiators had beaten Roman guards and lived to tell about it. But the rebels didn't know about Rome's secret weapon. The Senate, dismissing this as a minor policing issue, sent Praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber with 3,000 militia, not even proper legionaries. They surrounded Vesuvius's only known path. Confident hunger would force surrender. Modern historians still can't explain how Spartacus discovered the wild vines growing on the volcano's far side. The rebels worked through the night, weaving. By dawn, they'd created rope ladders strong enough to hold armored men. As Glaber's troops watched the main path, Spartacus led his forces down sheer cliffs everyone deemed unclimbable. The ancient sources all agree on what came next. Glaber woke to his camp in flames. Gladiators who'd spent years studying death, now teaching its lessons to Roman militia. The praetor himself barely escaped, leaving equipment for thousands, proper swords, shields, armor, from chains to general in 3 days. Little did the Senate know what they'd unleashed. Every successful raid brought more followers. 10,000 by month's end, 20,000 by winter, 40,000 by spring. Farmers abandoning fields, miners fleeing quarries, household slaves slipping away in darkness. History pivoted on 70 kitchen knives. Spartacus transformed this human flood into an army. Gladiators became drill instructors. The arena's lessons discipline, weapons training, unit cohesion spread through the ranks. But Spartacus added something uniquely his: battlefield tactics, strategic thinking, the arts of war beyond entertainment. Remember this number. Within 6 months, slaves became an army that terrified legions. They moved like Roman forces, fought with Roman discipline, but carried something Rome couldn't understand: the fury of the freed. What happened at dawn shocked even veterans. Captured Romans faced ultimate role reversal. Spartacus ordered gladiatorial games with Roman prisoners as unwilling participants. The message was crystal clear. Now you'll understand what it feels like. The sand drinks deep, but never forgets. These weren't just military victories. They were psychological warfare against an empire built on slavery. 3 separate Roman expeditions met defeat. Praetor Publius Varinius lost his horse and narrowly avoided capture. His subordinates fell in battle. Roman military standards, Their sacred eagles decorated rebel camps. Each victory proved the impossible. Slaves could beat citizens, gladiators could defeat soldiers, the oppressed could become conquerors. Archaeological evidence reveals the true scale of rebel organization: weapon manufacturing sites, training grounds, supply depots. This wasn't a mob, it was a nation being born in violence and hope. But winter was coming, and with it, hard choices. Then Rome made its first fatal mistake. The Senate's panic reached levels unseen since Hannibal crossed the Alps. Spartacus now commanded between 70,000 and 100,000 followers, a force larger than most Roman armies. Dispatches from terrorized landowners flooded the capital. "They move like locusts," one wrote, "but locusts that fight like legions." In that moment, history held its breath. The rebels controlled vast swaths of southern Italy. They defeated every force sent against them. Roman authority crumbled wherever Spartacus appeared. The entire slave-based economy teetered on collapse. You're looking at the moment Rome nearly fell. But in the Senate, heated debates raged. Sending consular armies against slaves, the shame alone could topple political careers. This is the detail that haunts me. They still didn't understand they faced more than escaped slaves. They faced the rage of generations given human form. The rebels, meanwhile, perfected their craft. This single decision would doom them all. Instead of marching on Rome itself while the capital remained paralyzed by indecision, Spartacus turned south. Some historians claim he aimed for Sicily, planning to inspire island-wide revolt. Others suggest he simply wanted to lead his people home: Thracians to Thrace, Gauls to Gaul, Germans to Germania. Perspectives split the leadership. Crassus advocated continuing the rampage through Italy, growing stronger with each victory. Oenomaus had died gloriously in earlier battles, his loss leaving a void in strategic planning. Spartacus seemed torn between revolutionary and shepherd, between toppling Rome and saving his people. Picture 6,000 bodies for 120 miles, but that horror remained months in the future. For now, the rebels dominated every encounter. Roman armies arrived to find their opponents had vanished like morning mist, only to reappear behind their lines. Spartacus employed tactics learned not in the arena, but on real battlefields: feigned retreats, night attacks, psychological warfare. The evidence suggests something even worse for Roman pride: defections from their own ranks, auxiliary troops themselves barely more than slaves switching sides mid-battle. The rigid hierarchy that held Rome together was dissolving in the acid of rebellion. Then Spartacus gave the order that changed everything. The army would split. Crassus would take 30,000 Gauls and Germans to continue ravaging Italy. Spartacus would lead the remainder toward the southern coasts, two hammers striking separately rather than one massive blow. But first, let me explain why this matters. It was the beginning of the end. Unity had made them unstoppable. Division would make them mortal. The Roman messenger's report survives to this day, describing Senate relief at news of the split. "Let them devour each other," one senator proclaimed, but they underestimated both leaders. Crassus's rampage through central Italy wrote new chapters in terror. His forces showed no mercy to Roman settlements, viewing each victory as payback for years of oppression. What Crassus did next shocked even hardened Romans, but we'll reach that darkness soon. Spartacus, leading the main force, displayed strategic brilliance that confirmed his military background. He defeated 2 consular armies in a single day near Picenum. Consul Gellius barely escaped with his life. Consul Lentulus' forces scattered like leaves. The impossible kept happening: kitchen slaves defeating Rome's finest. Here's what changed everything. The rebels captured enough equipment to outfit a professional army, no more farm tools and gladiator gear. They marched in Roman armor, carried Roman weapons, used Roman tactics. Observers couldn't tell rebel from legionary at distance. The transformation was complete. But that was before winter 72 BCE arrived with a man whose wealth exceeded kingdoms and whose ambition knew no bounds. Marcus Licinius Crassus had been waiting for precisely this moment. While other senators saw disaster, he saw opportunity. The richest man in Rome would buy himself military glory with rebel blood. His first act as supreme commander revealed his nature. When one of his legions fled before rebel forces, Crassus revived decimation, an ancient punishment where every 10th soldier was beaten to death by his comrades. The message spread through Roman ranks faster than any victory. Fear Crassus more than Spartacus. What happened next would haunt Roman nightmares for generations. Crassus didn't just bring 6 legions. He brought unlimited resources, engineering genius, and a cruelty that made arena deaths seem merciful. While Spartacus had split his forces, Crassus remained focused on one goal: ending the rebellion in such a way that slaves would never again dare raise their hands. Archaeological evidence reveals something even more terrifying about Crassus's preparations. Supply depots established in a line across Italy, not for a battle, for a trap. He understood what others had missed. You couldn't chase Spartacus, you had to cage him. The next 3 days would determine the fate of the Republic. Reports reached Spartacus of Crixus's location, of Crassus's movements, of winter closing mountain passes. Every decision now carried the weight of 100,000 lives. The Gladiator, who'd started with kitchen knives, now commanded forces that could reshape the ancient world. But in Rome, one man saw opportunity in crisis. Marcus Licinius Crassus owned silver mines that generated more wealth daily than most Romans saw in lifetimes. He'd built his fortune on others' misfortunes, buying burning buildings cheap, using his private fire brigade to save them, selling them back at profit. Now he would purchase immortality with blood. But Crassus had a darkness even Rome feared. His decimation wasn't random brutality, it was calculated terror. Soldiers drawing the death lots begged for mercy. Crassus watched stone-faced as friends beat friends to death with clubs. One executed soldier was the son of a senator. Another was his own lieutenant's cousin. The screaming started at dawn and lasted until noon. Every 10th man methodically murdered by his brothers in arms. The army that emerged from this horror was transformed. They feared their general more than any enemy. Crassus had turned Rome's greatest weakness, their terror of gladiators, into strength through greater terror. 6 legions moved with mechanical precision, no longer men but instruments of their commander's will. But first, the rebels had to survive immediate catastrophe. News arrived like a dagger to the heart. Crixus was dead. Surrounded near Mount Garganus, his 30,000 had fought with desperate fury. The ancient sources all agree on this horrific detail. 12,300 rebels died in a single day. Crixus himself fell, leading a final charge, the undefeated Gaul defeated at last. Spartacus's response revealed the arena's lasting poison in his soul. He organized funeral games for Crixus using 300 Roman prisoners. The moment when masters became slaves reached its pinnacle. Roman citizens forced to fight each other, while former slaves cheered. Some prisoners were military tribunes, others were local magistrates. All died in the sand, their blood mixing with generations of gladiator blood. This is why Spartacus terrified them more than Hannibal. The Carthaginian general threatened Rome's power. Spartacus threatened its entire worldview. Every Roman forced into gladiatorial combat proclaimed, "Your citizenship means nothing. Your superiority is illusion. You are what you made us, entertainment." With Crixus dead and winter approaching, Spartacus made for Brundisium, planning to sail for Sicily. The island's massive slave population promised fresh recruits. Previous slave revolts that had taken years to suppress. But the Cilician pirates he'd paid for ships had other plans. They took his gold and sailed away, leaving thousands stranded on Italian beaches. Then came the betrayal nobody saw coming. Crassus had anticipated everything. While Spartacus negotiated with pirates, Roman engineers worked tirelessly. They built a wall 40 miles long, 15 feet high, with a deep trench across the entire toe of Italy. In weeks, they'd turned geography into a prison. The rebels woke to find themselves trapped with winter at their backs and legions at their front. The scale becomes clear when you realize 100,000 people needed food daily. Crassus's trap was brilliant in its simplicity. Let hunger do what battles couldn't. Foraging parties met Roman steel. Supply raids found empty granaries. Crassus had evacuated everything edible. The rebels began eating horses, then leather, then anything that might sustain life. But Spartacus had learned something: in the arena, desperation breeds innovation. On a freezing night, with snow falling thick, he ordered something that defied belief. Rebels killed 300 cattle, tied bundles of wood to their horns, set them ablaze, and drove them at a section of Roman wall. In the chaos and confusion of flaming cattle charging through darkness, Spartacus led a breakthrough. What followed wasn't a battle, but a reckoning. A third of his army punched through Crassus's wall before Romans could respond. The engineering marvel that took weeks to build was breached in hours. Crassus's rage was volcanic. He crucified every guard who'd let rebels escape, displaying their bodies as examples. The running battles across southern Italy that followed tested both armies to breaking point. Spartacus showed why Rome's greatest weakness wasn't its armies but its kitchens. He knew their supply lines, their logistics, their dependencies. Every villa burned meant Romans went hungry. Every aqueduct cut meant Romans went thirsty. He was teaching the empire its own vulnerability. But attrition worked both ways. Each battle cost irreplaceable rebels. Spartacus couldn't train new gladiators fast enough to replace losses. Crassus could summon fresh legions with a letter. The mathematics of rebellion were inexorable. The oppressed always outnumbered oppressors, but organization and resources favored power. Then Spartacus proved he understood his fate. Before the final battle at the river Silarius, he drew his sword and killed his own horse. "If we win, there'll be thousands of Roman horses," he told his men. "If we lose, I won't need one." 100,000 souls united by chains and fury heard their leader accept no possibility of retreat. The battle formations that morning revealed everything. Crassus arranged his legions in traditional Roman fashion, disciplined, methodical, grinding. Spartacus placed his best fighters, the original gladiators, at the spear point aimed directly at Crassus's position. This wasn't strategy anymore, it was revenge seeking its target. Archaeological evidence reveals the true scale of what happened next. Weapons scattered across miles, mass graves hastily dug, the river itself redirected by the volume of bodies damming its flow. Modern analysis suggests the fighting lasted over 10 hours, not the quick arena bouts but prolonged, desperate warfare. Spartacus fought like the gladiator he'd always been, but with purpose beyond entertainment. Witnesses described him cutting through Roman lines like death itself, always pushing toward Crassus's standard. He killed 2 centurions personally. Roman discipline bent under his assault. For a moment, it seemed the impossible might happen again. But numbers tell their story. Fresh Roman reserves replaced exhausted front lines. Rebel reinforcements didn't exist. When Roman cavalry finally flanked the rebel position, the end was mathematical. Yet Spartacus kept advancing, kept killing, kept seeking Crassus. The exact moment of his death remains history's mystery. Romans claimed he died fighting, surrounded by enemies, still trying to reach their general. His body was never identified among the dead, either mangled beyond recognition or hidden by followers. Some whispered he escaped, but the rebellion's end proved otherwise. 60,000 rebels died at Silarius. 6,000 survivors surrendered, expecting military execution, quick, honorable death. What Crassus planned was neither. But the rebels didn't know about Rome's secret weapon. Not military might, but theatrical cruelty, the empire's true genius for terror. As Spartacus fell, the real horror was just beginning. The hammering started at dawn and didn't stop for weeks. 6,000 crosses rose along the Appian Way, Rome's most important highway connecting the capital to the south. But here's what the Roman historians tried to hide. This wasn't just execution. It was industrial-scale psychological warfare. Crassus personally supervised the logistics. Every mile, 50 crosses. Every cross, carefully positioned for maximum visibility. Every victim, selected to tell a story. The strongest rebels were crucified first, their endurance prolonging the spectacle. Leaders were placed at prominent intersections. The message carved into Roman consciousness: this is the price of defiance. The crucifixion process reveals Roman efficiency at its most monstrous. Specialized teams worked in sequence. First came the scourging whips embedded with bone and metal tearing flesh from backs. Then the crossbeam carry, rebels forced to drag their own execution tools through jeering crowds. The nailing came next, iron spikes through wrists and feet, positioned to avoid major arteries, ensuring maximum suffering before death. You have to understand the scale here. The Appian Way stretched 120 miles from Rome to Capua, where it all began. Travelers for decades afterward described the journey. Every few steps, another dying rebel. The strongest lasted days. Bodies weren't removed, left to rot as warnings. The stench carried for miles. Crows grew fat. The road became synonymous with death. But Crassus faced a problem. General Pompey, returning from Spain, encountered 5,000 rebels who'd fled the final battle. His legions destroyed them in hours. Then Pompey claimed credit for ending the entire rebellion. Crassus defeated slaves, he proclaimed to the Senate, but I tore out the roots of war. The political insult cut deeper than any gladiator's blade. Crassus had spent his fortune, decimated his own troops, engineered impossible victories only to watch Pompey steal glory with a skirmish. The Senate's response was calculated humiliation. Pompey received a full triumph, the highest military honor. Crassus was granted only an ovation, a lesser celebration reserved for victories over unworthy enemies. Every cross told the same story. Rome does not forgive. But they also told another story the empire didn't intend. 6,000 men who chose death over chains. 6,000 testimonies to human dignity. 6,000 reasons why oppression breeds its own destruction. The rotting bodies left for years as warning became monuments to resistance. Immediate changes rippled through Roman society. Gladiator schools implemented new security, multiple walls, increased guards, weapons locked separately from fighters. The kitchen knives that started everything vanished from gladiator areas. Slaves throughout Italy faced new restrictions, travel passes, curfews, collective punishments for individual escapes. Personal stories emerged from the horror. A Roman matron identified her former cook among the crucified, begged permission to bury him, was refused. A veteran recognized his own former orderly. They'd served together in Macedonia before the man was enslaved for debt. Children born in the rebellion died on crosses beside parents who dreamed of their freedom. The economic impact was immediate and lasting. Landowners who'd lost everything demanded compensation. The Senate debated but ultimately refused. Accepting liability would admit the state's failure. Insurance rates for slave ownership skyrocketed. Some Romans began advocating for wage labor, arguing slaves were becoming more trouble than value. The system that built Rome was showing cracks, but individual fates proved most telling. Pompey's stolen glory would poison his relationship with Crassus forever. Their rivalry would help destroy the Republic within 2 decades. Crassus himself, driven by desire for military glory, Spartacus had denied him, would die in Parthia. Parthians poured molten gold down his throat, a fitting end for one whose wealth had purchased so much death. Then the screaming started again, not from crosses but from Senate floors. Politicians who'd minimized the rebellion now exaggerated it for gain. We were days from destruction, they proclaimed, demanding emergency powers. The precedent set during the crisis supreme commands, private armies, decimation's return, would eventually enable Caesar's dictatorship. Archaeological evidence from mass graves tells individual stories. A woman buried with a gladiator's sword rebel fighter or grieving widow. Children with rebellion-era injuries that healed. They lived free, however briefly. Roman coins found in rebel caches, stamped with the year 73 BCE freedom, lasted long enough to require currency. 6,000 screams that echo through history, but also 6,000 silences, names lost, stories untold, dreams dying with their dreamers. The crosses stood so long they became landmarks. Turn left at the 100th cross. Meet me at the crosses by the olive grove. Death normalized into direction. This is the moment everything changed for Rome's slaves. Not hope, Spartacus's defeat crushed that for generations. But knowledge. The impossible had happened once. Kitchen knives had challenged empire. Gladiators had become generals. For 2 years, the enslaved had lived as free. The memory couldn't be crucified. But Rome's victory would prove hollow. The economic mathematics that doomed Spartacus would eventually doom Rome itself. The empire required slaves to function, but slaves required brutal suppression, which required resources that required more slaves. The cycle Spartacus exposed would grind for centuries, until economic reality crushed Roman power more thoroughly than any barbarian invasion. Crassus met his end in Parthia, 53 BCE. Leading legions against horse archers, he died reaching for glory that Spartacus had made necessary. The Parthians, knowing his reputation for greed, executed him by pouring molten gold down his throat. Even in death, Spartacus won. Crassus never escaped the shadow of fighting slaves. But Spartacus transcended his defeat. Roman historians who demonized him couldn't hide their respect. Plutarch called him distinguished by intelligence and humanity. Appian noted his great spirit. Even those who profited from slavery acknowledged he was more than the savage they needed him to be. The gladiator who forced Romans to fight as gladiators had forced them to see him as human. His name became a whisper in slave quarters, a prayer in chain gangs, a promise in the darkest nights. Every subsequent revolt invoked him. When slaves rose in Sicily, they called their leader Spartacus Reborn. Medieval peasant uprisings claimed his legacy. Haitian revolutionaries knew his story. The gladiator who made Rome tremble inspired trembling across millennia. The ultimate irony burns through history. Emperor Commodus, great-great-grandson of emperors, fought as a gladiator for pleasure. He died strangled by a wrestler, a slave. The arena that created Spartacus eventually consumed Rome's rulers. The sand drinks deep, but never forgets. Modern parallels multiply his meaning. Every factory uprising, every colonial rebellion, every march for dignity carries his echo. From chains to general in 3 days, the transformation terrifies power everywhere. His tactical innovations, turning oppressors' tools against them, making weakness strength, unity from diversity, remain revolutionary textbook. But perhaps his greatest victory was dying free. For 2 years, he commanded his fate, chose his battles, protected his people. Died trying to personally kill his tormentor rather than accept capture. The man who entered Capua's gladiator school in chains left the world a free general. Rome could kill him but couldn't re-enslave him. The 70 kitchen knives forged more than rebellion. They forged a legend that 2,000 years couldn't kill. Every history of Rome must explain how cooking implements nearly toppled the eternal city. Every discussion of slavery must acknowledge that the oppressed can organize, can fight, can win, even if briefly, even if brutally crushed. What followed wasn't a battle, but a reckoning that echoes still. When humans are reduced to property, when dignity is denied, when hope seems impossible, kitchen knives can become swords, gladiators can become generals, and empires can tremble before those they thought beneath consideration. The crosses are gone, the names are lost. But the message remains, carved into history, with gladiators' blood and rebels' courage. The powerful should fear the powerless, because desperation plus opportunity equals revolution. Spartacus didn't just lead a slave revolt, he proved forever that there are no natural slaves, only temporary chains. Those kitchen knives forged a legend that 2,000 years couldn't kill.